I've owned this Dyson Purifier Hot+Cool for roughly 1 year, and you guys showed me a lot of love for my review, so I very much appreciate that. Now this actually got the attention of Coway, a South Korean manufacturer that's been around since 1989. That's actually before I was born, by the way, so shout out for them for being around for such a long time. Now Coway have actually kindly sponsored this video and also sent me the Airmega Jet AP1220B to compare to this Dyson Purifier. So to kick off this video, let's talk about the overall asking price, and here the Coway comes in at £260 to £300 in the UK, while the replacement filters cost roughly £35 to £50, and that is via the official Coway store. Now the filters themselves are recommended to be changed after a year of usage, and that is after you're using it for 24 hours a day on its auto mode preset or 8 hours a day on its turbo mode preset, which both are probably going to be a little bit unrealistic. So expect the cost per year to maintain the Coway to actually be a little bit lower. Now by comparison, the Dyson costs you £65 to replace its filters, while the unit itself starts from £550, while the model that I actually have costs a whopping £650. Now it's worth considering here that the Dyson does offer a heating functionality as well as a cooling and purification, while the Coway is only providing you cool air and purification. So that might explain the discrepancy in price between the two products, but it's of course something worth considering as to if there's a feature that you're looking for in the Dyson versus the Coway. So moving swiftly on, let's talk about the overall aesthetics, and here the Coway is available in an all white finish. Of course there's a few grey accents at the top of it, but in terms of the overall dimensions, it's roughly 72 centimeters tall, 38 centimeters wide and 21 centimeters deep. These are my own measurements, by the way. Now this is of course a little bit bulkier than the Dyson, but we'll touch upon that very shortly. Now for you to interact with the Coway, there is a physical dial found on the right hand side, allowing you to go between focus and normal. Normal is purifying the entire room, focus is, as the name suggests, focusing in a certain area. So for example, if you want wind blowing towards your face, you might want to go on the focus mode instead of normal. Now here there are some touch sensitive buttons found at the top of the unit for you to, let's say, switch between the different modes. So for example, auto, silent, turbo, or the manual modes at level 1, 2 and 3. Now it's worth considering here that you can disable the touch buttons in case, for example, you have a child, and therefore there is a little child lock that can be initiated very easily. And you would have noticed that there's a few LEDs. Now these LEDs can be fully disabled if, for example, you want to have in a pitch black room and you're sleeping beside it, for example, it's not going to bother you. Equally, the ring LED indicator that can be found towards the front of it can also be fully disabled. Now this little ring LED, you might want to have it enabled during the day because it gives you a little indication of the purification process. There's different color schemes, and the different colors will depict as to the overall quality of the air, which is quite handy to know and also quite cool to actually see it in motion. Now by comparison, the Dyson is a little bit taller at 77 centimeters and is roughly 25 by 25 centimeters in terms of the overall width and depth, and therefore is a little bit more slender. Of course, it might be a bit obvious when you're looking at this video. It's worth considering there's a few different variants of this Dyson. You can find one which is a lot taller, so therefore it might take a little bit more room, but anyway, the one that I'm comparing it to is a little bit more slender. In terms of the overall design of it, it's available in a few different finishes. Of course, it depends as to which model you choose. In my case, I've got a copper silver white finish. Now, it is worth considering here that the Coway is only available in a singular motion. In other words, it's placed in a singular way. However, the Dyson has got an oscillating feature and therefore can rotate to pretty much 360 degrees. And this can be customized via the remote control. So yes, you do have a remote control with the Dyson, which you do not have with the Coway, and you do also have an app integration with the Dyson as well. If you do want to interact with it physically, then there's a little button which allows you to power on and off the device, and there's also a little LCD display which gives you the air quality indication, very much like you'd find on the Coway via the LED ring. Now speaking of interacting with these products, you of course have the filters which you might want to replace at a later date, or of course if you've purchased it new, you'll definitely want to take away the packaging. Make sure you do that on the Coway, or for example place it in from the regular packaging on the Dyson. Now here both of them are very easy to do, whereby on the Coway you've got a little plastic material that you remove, the frontal facade of it. It reveals a few filters which therefore you can remove and replace or indeed wash or clean, which we'll touch upon very shortly. As for the Dyson, it's got a little release mechanism found on either side. It props open the sides of it and allows you to change the filters. It's all very intuitive and very easy to do on both units. Now shifting our attention back to the Coway, there are a few different filters that the manufacturer offers, and here it's actually pretty fascinating. You've got a pre-filter, which effectively is to be washed or cleaned, in other words via vacuum cleaner, every 2 to 4 weeks, and effectively tries to capture any sort of large dust, fur or pet hair. Now behind that you've got an activated carbon filter, which tries to remove any sort of bad smell, odor or any sort of harmful gases, and then behind that still you've then got an ultrafine particle filter, which is a HEPA filter fitted with antivirus green HEPA technology, which is useful for people like myself because it removes any sort of airborne particles such as allergens and also bacteria. And furthermore, what actually differentiates the green HEPA filter is that it actually inactivates captured germs. Now the combination of this means that Coway offers up to 99.999% of harmful particles to be removed, all the way down to 0.01 microns, which is absolutely insane. Now, just to put it into perspective, the Dyson removes 99.95% of particles and gets down to 0.1 microns, so not as impressively low as 0.01 microns of the Coway. Now, I've got no means of certifying either unit myself, although they've both been certified by independent companies, so they will be able to do that, but of course I'm just reiterating what the manufacturers are offering and of course the specifications that are listed on both of their respective websites. So with all of that in mind, what can I actually measure? Well, I've got a wattage meter and I was able to plug in both units and actually check for the power draw. Now here you can see a pretty detailed graph of the Coway. You've got different modes, in other words normal and focus, and then within that you've got level 1, 2, 3 auto, silent and turbo, and then with that even more you've then got the modes with it, the light fully enabled and the lights fully disabled. Now of course here the light is very minimal in terms of the overall power draw. It's roughly sitting at under 2 watts, but then you can see in the different level modes there's definitely a discrepancy in terms of how much power is being drawn, and of course that's relating to how much power is therefore being provided to you, in other words how much air is being shoved into, let's say, your face or the room. Now here in terms of the normal mode, the turbo mode does take in roughly 48.5 watts, while in terms of the focus mode it takes roughly 24.4 watts. You can see a big difference in terms of that. Now if we shift our attention to the Dyson, here you've got 10 level modes, and yes, I did test all of these, and here you can see that there's quite a few differences. There's level 1 to 10, you've got oscillating, enabled and then disabled, and then you've got the front and then rear, very much like the Coway, how you've got the focus and normal mode, you've got all these modes as well. Now the Dyson doesn't have as many discrepancies in terms of the differences between the two. It seems to be quite linear and quite very much gradual in terms of the differences, but yet again over here the rear mode seems to draw in more energy and therefore takes more effort for the Dyson to be producing that same amount of air. So I just found that quite fascinating. One thing I would like to highlight over here is that the standby on the Dyson sits at 1.4 watts in comparison to the Coway, which sat at 0.6 watts. Now following on from this, I should mention that the Dyson has got a heating functionality, and of course this is going to draw in more power because it's heating the filaments. In this respect, the Dyson draws in roughly 225 to 235 watts of power from the wall, and yes, that's a massive increase over the regular fan, but again it should come as no surprise due to its heating functionalities. I actually noticed a peak of 335 watts, although that seemed to be a blip in the matrix. Now here, if we compare it to the Coway, it does not have a heating functionality. The manufacturer claims you can put it next to another appliance, such as let's say a heater, and therefore it's going to circulate some of the hot air through its fan and then upwards, or of course in terms of the focus mode. It's not going to be as effective as the Dyson, but it's just something worth considering in terms of potentially reducing your overall electricity bill. Now aside from a wattage meter, I do also have a sound meter, and here I was able to compare both units. I was roughly 1.3 to 1.4 meters away from them and tried to do it objectively and in a controlled manner as much as possible. Now here you can see that the Dyson goes from roughly 36 dBA on level 1 all the way up to 54.3 dBA on level 10, while the Coway goes from 35.5 dBA up to 53.7 dBA. It seemed to be a little bit louder on its normal mode preset in comparison to the focus mode preset. Nonetheless, over here, of course, both units are relatively the same in terms of the loudness. Of course, it's very hard to compare and contrast because they don't all have the same sort of modes, but for example, the turbo mode in comparison to level 10 is very similar in terms of the overall sound that both units portray. So what about when it comes to the sheer air power that both of these are able to produce? Well, I don't have a CFM measuring tool, but I do have the good old paper test, which actually allows you to compare compare and contrast with your own fan if you have one in and around the house. Now I'll say in terms of the focus mode on the Coway, it's very much funneled into a singular direction and area. And of course, if I were to put the paper downwards, it is not anymore blowing air outwards, and instead over here, the fan is actually drawing air inwards. So it's worth considering that the focus mode is very much as the name suggests. However, if you want air to be funneled throughout the room, of course, you're going to want to go on the normal mode preset. Here, I will say that subjectively, it does feel a lot more powerful than the focus mode, and that is somewhat correlating with the power draw indicator that I had before, let's say when I was comparing the two turbo modes. Here the normal mode seems a lot more powerful, and it's almost no surprise here because it's trying to feed air and purify air across the entire room, and therefore just needs a lot more power, therefore drawing more power in terms of from the wall and also giving you more air power as well. Again, if these are two different modes that you can select from, and it's for you to choose as to what works best. Now shifting our attention towards the Dyson, here you've got that elongated design instead. And of course here in comparison to the Coway, when we're looking at the frontal focus mode in comparison to the Dyson, of course the Dyson is producing a lot more air from its frontal unit. But then of course you have to consider that the Coway has got its normal mode preset, which is somewhat similar to what the Dyson produces. Now the Dyson itself funnels a lot of air in terms of a narrow direction, but of course here, due to its oscillating feature and the fact that it can be tilted backwards or forwards, it's somewhat similar in terms of what the Coway offers in terms of its normal mode preset, and therefore giving you air purification throughout the room rather than just focusing it on a singular direction. Effectively, what I'm trying to say over here is both of them are quite comparable in terms of the sheer amount of air power they're able to produce. Although here, if we're comparing like for like, you have got the focus mode of the Coway, which has got a lot more narrower and of course, as the mode suggests, focus in a certain area, whereby the Dyson has got that larger surface area and therefore produces more air in a singular direction, at least when it's fixed. Now of course you've got the oscillating feature on the Dyson, therefore providing purification across the room, which would be the same as the Coway on its normal mode preset. So with all of that in mind, I'd be interested to know which purifier you would pick and why. Would it be the Coway Airmega Jet AP1220B, or would it be the Dyson Hot+Cool? Do let me know down in the comment section below, because I'd be genuinely intrigued. Now, if you've enjoyed this informative and hopefully you found it quite objective in terms of the comparison between the two products, I would definitely appreciate you dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification. Of course, if you haven't already. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.